was teed up, the first question that was asked. This is the future of transportation, which there was an old Marshall McLuhan comment that we saw the future by looking through our rear view mirror. It is important that we no longer look at transportation's future through a rear view mirror. Let me introduce to you the panel this morning. Matt Burns is Associate Principal for Ramey and Associates. The other three speakers are Jason Pack, Principal at Fair and Piers Transportation Consultants, Sarah Jepson, Active Transportation Manager for SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments, and Matt Barth, who's Director of CSIRT here at UCR. CSIRT is probably the largest and most important research center at the University of California, Riverside. Matt Barth has been its distinguished director for some 10 years, and it's good to have Matt on this panel. Before they start, we think we have a video, is that right? Jennifer promises a video, we will see. Video.
There might be a better way. You have a choice of apps to help you get around because you have a choice of how you get around. A choice for you and a choice for your family. Trading in your keys doesn't mean trading in your freedom. It means having even more options. And getting around however you want to. There are a lot of obstacles between you and your destination. But finding parking doesn't have to be one of them. Neither does the weather. Or waiting in traffic. There are many choices for fulfilling your transportation needs, and picking up your keys doesn't have to be the only one. WRCOG is working with its member agencies and partners to explore the many alternatives for a mobile lifestyle in western Riverside County.
All right, we all awake now? Thank you guys for being here today. Really excited to be part of this panel on the future of mobility. My name is Matt Burris, and I'm a land use planner and planning commissioner. So why is a land use planner up here talking about the future of mobility? My job is to work with cities and help them do their general plans. As Greg said at the very beginning of today's conference, one of the great things about a general plan is it presents a city or county sometimes with an opportunity of articulating its vision for the next 20 years. So very often I am in a position of working with cities and we get that question of, well, what is the future of mobility going to mean for us? And it's probably not adequate for any of us to think, well, I don't know. Good luck. And I think about what it must be like to have been practicing as a planner or civil engineer 100 years ago. In fact, if I remember correctly, if my planning history serves me, in the early 1900s, there was a conference, a planning conference in New York City that was canceled halfway through because the flies and manure stench was so great that they had to cancel it. And so I imagine, what must it have been like to be practicing 100 years ago, thinking about how the city's going to grow and all the issues we're dealing with. We must have been having conversations like, where are we going to put the next livery stable? How are we going to feed all these horses? What do we do with the hundreds of horses that die every day in the middle of the street? The projections for all this horse manure, it's going to be above the tops of our buildings. What do we do about all that? not knowing that 10 years later, automobiles would be ubiquitous. And everything that we had been talking about, all the infrastructure investment decisions that we had been making would be moot. They'd be wrong. We'd commit, so we're possibly in the same position today. Similarly, I think about what it must have been like in the 40s, 50s, when we were planning and building the interstate highway system and local highways and such, and we were plowing them through the hearts of our cities. And at the time, we were sure that that was the thing to do. That was the good solution, and it was going to be great for our cities because we're going to have all this additional mobility without fully understanding those unintended consequences. So this topic of the future of mobility and thinking about all these things that are going to be happening over the next 1 to 2 decades and what it means for our cities is fascinating to me. I think about it a lot and try and help cities prepare for that future as uncertain as it is. And that's going to be a lot of what we're talking about today. What is that future of mobility and what does it mean for our communities? So we're going to start off, each of the rest of the panel, just take a moment or two and talk a little bit about who you are and kind of the position or assumptions about the future of mobility that you're bringing to this discussion. And I'm going to start from the middle. Jason.
Hello,
you
everybody.
first.
So my name is Jason Pack. I'm a principal with Farron Piers. I was actually born and raised in Northern California, diehard San Francisco Giants fan. So for all you Dodger fans out there, I apologize up front. But I did grow up in a very small town north of Sacramento called Grass Valley, up in the mountains. Anybody know where Grass Valley is? A handful of you out there. So growing up, my whole center of transportation was in the car. I mean, everything was spread out. My high school was 25 miles away from where we lived. My elementary school was 3 miles. I did ride my bike to school back then. But as soon as I turned 16, had a couple jobs, girlfriend, and I hopped in my 1955 Chevy that I built, and I was off getting a whopping 6 miles per gallon in that car. So fast forward, I went to college. I went to UC Davis. I have a civil engineering degree from Davis. Took 2 cars to Davis because I had to have my Chevy, and my dad wanted me to have a more efficient car, which was my mom's Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. Took both those to college and ended up riding my bike everywhere because for those of you that don't know, Davis has about a 60% mode split to bikes, peds, and transit. I then spent the next 4 years after that in our San Jose office, primarily working on bicycle and pedestrian studies there. Worked on a bicycle freeway study looking at connecting all the creeks at their confluence in downtown San Jose. I then relocated up to Sacramento because I couldn't afford a house in San Jose. And my wife and I wanted to start a family, and 2 engineers couldn't afford a house in San Jose. So I spent the next 5 years in Sacramento, and then I moved down here to Riverside about 9 years ago now. So I've been practicing down here. I do a lot of complete streets projects, a lot of general plans. Matt and I do a fair bit of work together, and I'm excited to be here.
And where are you coming from on this kind of future mobility?
So future mobility, man, I could talk all day on that.
So I'll help everybody clarify. What is one big assumption that you think is going to happen? I know what it is. You tell me all the time. But
Yeah,
I'll
I'll tell you. Autonomous vehicles are coming. You can kind of be an ostrich, put your head in the sand, and pretend that things, the way we travel today or 10 years ago, is going to be the same 20 years from now. But they're coming. The state's going to regulate it. The feds are going to regulate it. It's going to be allowed. So you could either pretend it's not and deal with it when the time comes, try and be progressive and look forward. But that's kind of the biggest change I see in what's coming.
Right on. Thanks. All right, we'll go back and forth. One couch, the other couch. Sarah.
Great. Good morning. I'm Sarah Jepson, and I'm the manager of active transportation and special programs at the Southern California Association of Governments. And within that special programs realm, I also work on public health, water, and energy. So I think kind of a key role that I'm serving on this panel is a little bit connecting to the previous discussion where you talked a lot about public health and what changes are going to mean to communities. At SCAG, I serve in a couple different roles. I work and help support the development of our long-range transportation plan, which looks at how we're going to both coordinate the land use changes that are projected to occur in the next year with the transportation investments to achieve a wide range of goals that communities want to work towards, including improved mobility, health, and achieving some of our environmental goals. So I get to play that long-term, have those policy wonky discussions about where we're going and what all these things are going to mean. The other role that one of the reasons I really like my job is I also, in terms of a role in a long-term planning agency, I get to do a little bit more on the practitioner side. What we do in our program is we have the opportunity to award funding to local jurisdictions who are trying to build active transportation projects. And so serving in that role, I see really how difficult it is to build things and to see change actually happen in your communities. And because of that, one of the things that we've done is start a campaign called Go Human, where we work with cities to promote walking and biking. And that campaign has an element of public education, where we give cities resources to talk to their communities and help raise awareness about walking and biking to make it safer and more attractive for people to walk and bike. And then we also help them host demonstration projects where communities can test for a day or a week what it would be like if they reconfigured their streets to support walking and biking. And I guess I just want to mention that because I think all of these things that we're talking about change and change coming very quickly. And that is just in such sharp contrast to what we're used to in our communities. And so, I think as we think about the new technologies, we also need to be thinking about how we're going to talk to our communities and prepare them for what's going to be coming.
And Sarah, which coming technology do you think are you most certain we're going to see come to fruition?
Well, I mean, building off the autonomous vehicle, I think that's obviously something that's coming very quickly. I think one of the things that also we need to frame this discussion with, though, is when we develop our long-range transportation plan, the first thing that we ask ourselves is how are the communities going to be changing? Like 20 years from now, who's going to be living here? How much growth are we going to expect to occur? And where is that growth going to be located? And what we know from our planning efforts is in the next 20 years, we're expected to continue to grow by about 4 million people, and that growth will be slower than it has been historically. But of the new growth, we're going to try to put more of those people. People are looking for more housing choices and more compact communities, and so we're expecting that will be the people that we're trying to serve. So. I guess I just think it's important as we're thinking about where we're going to go with our transportation network. We need to think about the communities that we're trying to serve.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, Matt, you get to back clean up here. A little bit about yourself.
Okay, sure. So again, my name is Matt Barth. I'm a professor here at UC Riverside in electrical and computer engineering, and also director of CSERT, our Center for Environmental Research and Technology, which is right at the end of the parking lot. And as Mayor Leveridge mentioned, it's one of our larger research centers that looks at a lot of things dealing with air quality, energy, and transportation. So I moved to Riverside about 25 years ago, and of course, not as many students as UCR as there are now, and of course, a lot less vehicles on the road as we see today. My area is more in intelligent systems and how can we make better vehicles, and I've done work in robotics and things like that. And really, I got to credit Joe Norbeck, the founding director of CSERT, that really got me interested in a lot of these environmental issues. And so when we do our research now in the future of transportation, we're basically looking at things such as safety, mobility, how well do we get around, what are the congestion effects, and things like that. And then certainly the environmental issues, which includes, of course, air quality, energy use, and things like that. So, we do a lot of that type of research at CSERT, both from a modeling perspective. We do a lot of micro-scale simulation modeling to see what these future cities are going to look like, all the way from, certain percentages of automated vehicles on the road, what happens if we change our infrastructure, improve our traffic signals. Shared mobility is another big one. So those are things that we can kind of take a peek using these simulation models. But we also like to do a lot of on-road tests, and that's where I get excited, where we can run cars out in the parking lot and see how well they perform. We're planning on doing a lot more testing on different areas that have future corridors with communication systems and things like that. So that's, it's important, I think, to have that combination of both simulation as well as real-world testing to see how these things are going to work into the future. So the three main things that we kind of look at are what we refer to now as the three revolutions, right? We have electrification, we have this autonomous, which is connected and automated vehicles, and shared mobility. And really, those three things are going to happen. We just got to figure out how to make sure they're synergistic and they all work well together.
Okay, so electrification of the fleet, shared vehicle technology or models or economic dynamics, and autonomous vehicles. Those are the big three revolutions. Okay, so what do those mean for communities? It sounds pretty like a big, profound shift.
Yeah, so my opinion in the communities that we work with, it's different in every community. So I've worked with communities that are focused on when do we need to pave our dirt roads, and how do we make walking along a dirt shoulder safer so we don't have collisions and fatalities. I've also worked in communities that have thriving downtowns that are struggling with how do we take shared mobility or TNCs, transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, can we combine them in a transportation hub of some sort to help facilitate that, and how do we manage our curb space with that? So the downtown component and how communities in a downtown are very different than a rural context. It's even more different in a suburban context. So I'm not sure there's one answer that fits all. But that's what I'm seeing from our clients.
So let's narrow it down a little bit. Maybe we can start with, what do you think the big opportunities are for communities given this new technology? Feel free, any of you guys can go, jump in.
I'd like to hear Sarah's take, because in my mind, two ends of every trip, or at least a pedestrian trip, and I'd kind of like to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think, we have, if we are able to move around more efficiently, we have greater opportunities to rethink about the ways that we're using and redesigning our streets. And so I think there's really an opportunity to think about how we make our streets focus more on people and accommodating people. So what we can do to improve our sidewalks and our bike infrastructure, I think, will be a key part of what communities can do to support kind of local mobility that they can connect up with some of the regional mobility options.
Maybe I'll just add on to that. One of the fun projects I get to work on is we have a contract with Metro right now, working on LA County projects where Metro has a complete streets policy that's rolled out countywide. And as a jurisdiction, if you want to qualify for Metro funding, you have to also adopt a complete streets policy that's consistent with Metro's. So Metro has rolled out a training program. So I'm one of the instructors on that. We teach 2-day courses open to all jurisdictions in Metro. One of the interesting things that we do with that is we do surveys of everybody in the audience, and by and large, this is planning directors, city engineers, city traffic engineers, public works directors, and we ask them, how well does your city plan for the automobile? And we get live survey data back, and I've delivered maybe 5 or 6 of these classes so far, and in every one, all of the people in the room have identified basically 83% of them, 85%, something like that, say that we plan for the vehicle really well. Then the next slide, we say, how well do we plan for the pedestrian? So that answer usually comes back pretty decent. Maybe 60 or 75% of them say we plan for the pedestrian really well. And then we ask the same thing, how well do we plan for bicycles on our network? And invariably, I get about 10 to 20% say we do that well, and the rest of them say they don't do it well. So kind of that mobility component, I think, and kind of serving all users, all needs, all abilities safely. I think the bicycle's probably the one that we've ignored the longest, and I think that kind of goes back to what you were identifying.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I mean, active transportation has to be a component of any future city. But part of it too is just simply getting away from the classic model of personalized mobility, right? Where we all let's go out and get a car that can satisfy many different purposes, whether it's a weekend trip or a commuter trip. I mean, when we're starting to see more electrification and vehicles that have certain characteristics that fit very well for different kinds of trips, let's make sure we're thinking outside the box and how we can, put those to use, and not just in moving passengers, but also goods, right? Goods movement is a key thing here too. Same thing with shared mobility, right? I mean, do we really need to have a car per driver? I mean, I think sharing vehicles is critical. It's been shown in many studies that it does reduce VMT. It certainly solves a lot of parking problems too. And then, of course, with automated vehicles, there are so many different variations in terms of how we do this, right? If for example, if we can buy an autonomous vehicle that can drive by itself, VMT has a chance to just zoom right up through the roof. We'll have our cars take our kids to soccer and medical appointments. Cars will be going all over the place. And so we really got to think hard about how do we manage the demand when we have these features that are associated with autonomous and automated vehicles.
So generally, it sounds like you're optimistic about the new technology or these new technological shifts, what they mean for our communities. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, I'm a little concerned. I mean, I think we need to continue to ask ourselves as we move forward with new mobility, is what's going to be the impact? Is everyone benefiting from the improvements? Are we thinking about equity? Are we thinking about health? Whenever this conversation comes up and people are all excited about moving around the city in new and exciting ways, I think of the Disney movie WALL-E and the unintended consequences. If you haven't seen it, people decide not to move anymore. They're all in their individual little mobility units, and the mobility unit takes them to wherever they need to go. And I think we need to recognize that we need to think about the health impacts and the unexpected consequences. One thing I also wanted to mention is as a parent and someone who has a very busy life, and 2 kids to take care of, the thing that I'm really most excited about with the coming of technology are not just the mobility options, but the enhanced accessibility that we have from our own homes. So, I can imagine in the future that I could get back 2 hours of my life that I spend commuting, which most people are spending about the same amount of time, and all of that money. So I think that the accessibility is also going to be this tremendous opportunity for communities. And if I had that level of accessibility when I'm thinking about mobility, I'm probably not going to go very far. I think there's great opportunities to, I can get everything I need, around my house through Amazon, other sources. I'm going to travel when I feel good about it. When it's fun to walk, I can experience the environment. It's fun to bike. I'm going to go to my downtown area to get food and that type of thing. So I think this opportunity of accessibility really is something we need to think about as well, because we talk about all the ways it's going to increase vehicle miles traveled, and we're going to be overcome with that. I just think I can't wait till I don't have to travel.
So, Sarah, if you could talk a little bit more about that. Sometime recently in the last couple months, I saw an article in ULI reporting on some pretty extensive modeling work, and it was saying the conclusions were essentially that with autonomous vehicles and TNCs, we could be seeing upwards of 20 to 35% increases in VMT. And their study came out last month as well, looking at New York City around Manhattan, and all the congestion management gains, all the alternative transportation, all the transit shifts that they had achieved over the last 10 to 15 years, they have lost in just the last 2 or 3 years with shared TNCs and shared vehicle approaches. So what enhanced accessibility are you thinking about that we're going to see? What is the enhanced accessibility, and where's it coming from that you're referring to?
Well, all of the trips that, for example, for commuting, teleworking is something that we've talked about for a long time, but I feel like this is the opportune time to have more of that. If you can pretty much do everything that you need to do at the office at your home. All of the trips that you take for shopping, a lot of that is coming to you now. So I think a lot of times when we develop our models, we look at historic behavior and how people have behaved. But I think what we're seeing with these increases in accessibility, it kind of throws everything out the window. I think we, are constantly need to rethink about how people are going to behave when they have these new accessibility options.
Gotcha. Thank you. So I'd also like to ask you, gentlemen, you both are involved in modeling and microsimulation type of activities in various ways. Again, in my role as a planning commissioner and in my role as a general plan consultant, I'm consistently in a position of helping communities make decisions about very long infrastructure investment decisions. And a lot of times we're making those decisions based on models. So just how well do our models predict this new transportation future?
Let me answer the question in two ways. So when we evaluate things like operations, right? So here's the infrastructure, here's the roads, here's how cars operate. We can think about how the infrastructure works with vehicles, and we can, I would say, pretty accurately measure how mobility changes, what the safety implications are, and what's the reduction in air quality. But the thing that we probably don't model too well is behavioral issues, right? The demand issue about, are people going to drive more because of that? Are they going to drive less? That's one of the hardest things to model. And there are models, but I think that's the key thing where there's the most uncertainty.
Yeah, in fact, there's a ton of variables that affect that. I mean, autonomous vehicles is just one. Price of gasoline will affect it as much, if not more, than the autonomous vehicle fleet. If gas prices double or triple, that will affect people's travel behavior significantly. I will say our firm's done some research on our own as far as MPO models and their sensitivity to even model an autonomous fleet and whether some of the predictions are even accurate. And we've tested, I think, 6 MPO models now from across the country on their sensitivity to autonomous vehicle fleets, and we've got some of that research published on our website. But it's intriguing to look at that of the 6, some of them do certain things well, others do other things well. But I'll say across the board, not many regional models do it well, or even are set up to do it. And like jurisdictions like SCAG, I think, didn't even include it in a significant level in its modeling for the RTP SCS.
So Jason, when you do your modeling of those autonomous rollouts, is it independent, or are you also looking at factors of shared mobility and electrification too? I mean, I think all 3 of these things play a synergistic role, and we can use all of them to sort of build a better future.
Yeah, well, when you get into shared mobility, in my mind, that's almost like a new mode choice. So in kind of our traditional travel demand models, we estimate the number of trips we're going to generate, where they're going to go, and then we get into the mode choice. How do we get there? And I'm not aware of any regional model that I've used that actually incorporates TNCs as a mode share right now. But I mean, it's a significant portion of the trips now on our network, right? And it's just growing. So I see kind of the future of transportation planning moving to making sure that we're accounting for that mode split, accounting for some of the factors that affect that autonomous vehicles will have. But right now, I think by and large, most of our regional models that we're sizing our infrastructure on, are probably doing the best they can looking backwards, but maybe not looking as forward as they could.
I think to address on SCAG's regional planning efforts, in our last plan, we weren't able to incorporate impacts from autonomous vehicles and shared mobility and that type of thing. But we're doing some studies with the other metropolitan planning organizations to hopefully be able to incorporate that in a bigger way in our next plan. One of the real opportunities that I think SCAG is seeing, and our leadership has been very supportive and interested in this, is we have, because of the technology and because of all of the now data and big data that's out there, We do have this tremendous opportunity to improve our modeling and to do it in a more rapid, do it more quickly. So, hopefully with our abilities to capture and use big data, we'll be able to keep up or try to keep up a little bit with all the changes that we're seeing.
Okay, so my millennial coworkers are totally jazzed about autonomous vehicles and TNCs. The electric vehicle thing, they're kind of like, yeah, it's coming. And they think it's going to solve all of our mobility problems. On the other hand, a lot of emerging research is showing that maybe these new technological shifts are going to lead to increased VMT and increased driving. And I have some inclination to believe that, the fundamental law of traffic congestion, right? That essentially the more we build, the more we expand capacity, the more people are going to drive. And so if I'm inclined to believe that the increased convenience and reduced cost that comes with autonomous vehicles might lead to more VMT. And our models are not quite up to reflecting what we don't know. So we're making a bunch of investment decisions about our communities, what the built environment is going to look like. In light of everything you guys know about these emerging technologies, what decisions about our built environment do you think are going to be out of date soonest? Or which things is it most imperative that our communities start rethinking now? Not everybody wants.
I just feel like I'm jumping in first all the time. Parking is, in my mind, number one, and I think it'll depend on the economic model, how an autonomous vehicle fleet emerges. If it comes out more like a TNC, where you have a subscription to General Motors, and today I need to go to Home Depot to pick up a tree for my backyard, and I order myself a truck, and it comes, picks me up, go to Home Depot, or better yet, order it from Home Depot and have it delivered. So I think if that's the model that emerges, parking, and especially in downtowns, and the number of parking structures that we've tended to build that have very long lifespans and a lot of financing tied to those lifespans. I tell my clients now when they're looking at parking structures, plan for a reuse 20, 30, 40 years from now, because it's very likely that demand still won't be here. Set your deck heights, your floor heights, so that you can adapt it to apartments or retail. Plumb it, put electrical in it now so that you're not trying to retrofit it after the fact. So I think those are some of the things that'll change pretty frequently, or will change dramatically and will affect the built environment quite a bit. I will say the part of autonomous vehicle fleet that kind of makes me the most nervous is actually the downtown context, where you have pedestrians stepping off the curb mid-block, and how an autonomous vehicle is going to react to that. I kind of see where we might be gaining capacity from reduced headways, or basically vehicles falling closer together on arterials and highways. And I see increased capacity associated with autonomous vehicles there. I do have a concern that the speed of an autonomous vehicle to maintain safety in a downtown is going to be pretty low, 5-7 miles an hour, because the autonomous vehicle's not going to be, or it's going to have some problems trying to adapt to that pedestrian stepping off mid-block. So I think those are kind of the two areas I see as kind of the concerns, at least in my mind. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I wanted to make one slight distinction. When I talk and hear about autonomous vehicles, I think of the Google car that's mostly sensors, that senses other vehicles. And it's actually been shown that those vehicles by themselves are really not going to improve mobility. It's not like you're going to get, closer spacings and all that. They're going to have kind of similar reaction times as what humans do. And so mobility improvements won't be that great with autonomous by itself. It's really the connectivity and the automation. That's when you're going to get, better formations, better merges, and things like that. So back to your question, Matt. I mean, what do we need to plan for? I think, in the next 5-10 years, we have our current roadway infrastructure, but eventually we got to start thinking, how's that roadway infrastructure going to change based on, again, electrification, automation, and the shared mobility. So one thing, take highways, right? So we have HOV lanes that are turning into HOT lanes, and now they're managed lanes. Eventually, if we have platooning trucks, there's going to be that type of operation, which we have to look at. Do lanes really need to be, the width they are now? I mean, if automated vehicles can control themselves to centimeters rather than meters, then lanes can certainly shrink. One thing are intersections, right? We are so used to these traffic lights and how they work, and I think we all get frustrated when we have to sit there and wait and there's no cars coming the other way. That's improving, but eventually with automation, people have talked about, well, let's just get rid of signals. I mean, cars can kind of maneuver and do things by themselves, which if you use a standard crossing pattern, it's dangerous. But the key is roundabouts, right? Roundabouts, humans don't merge very well, right? We're not very good at merging. But when you bring in automation, cars talking to each other, merges can be fast and safe, and you don't lose that capacity when you introduce a roundabout. So you see it in Europe. So I don't know. I think could be the future for the U.S. too.
Yeah, and I'll add on to what he had said. When you talk about connected vehicles and some of the infrastructure needed for that, right now, when jurisdictions go and you put in a signal pole or you're building a road, plan for the future of connectivity, and if you're going to need sensors and power to assist with that, spend the extra couple $100 to put some extra conduit in the ground. Buy the slightly more expensive signal pole that has plugs at the top of it so you can mount more sensors at the top. I think there are some small things that we can do now that in the grand scheme of things, if a traffic signal costs $350,000, you're spending $500 or $1,000 more on a pole so you can add electricity to it. That's something pretty small, and it's going to save you a ton of money in the future.
Well, I would just say a lot of what we are investing in the future is maintaining and operating what we currently have. More than half of the money in our regional transportation plan goes for that purpose. And I think, that needs to continue to be a priority because, those autonomous vehicles are going to operate on the streets as well. So a pothole today is still a pothole in the future, right? So, I just think as we move forward and maintain things, our existing investments, it is important to keep an eye out for opportunities to have that road serve multiple purposes. So if you can think about in the future how you might be able to accommodate an autonomous vehicle, or you can get more out of that investment.
All right, so I'm hearing roadway capacity could change. We might be able to get more out of our roads if our vehicles are more efficient in terms of the size and how they use the road, and maybe that becomes more complicated in places where you have a mixing of modes, and parking requirements may be overstated for that new future. Is there anything else about community design or how we're using the built environment and public realm that we should be thinking about?
It's exciting to me. I mean, if you think about, I think I read a study, there's like 5 parking spaces for every vehicle owned in the United States. Does that sound right?
Sounds right.
Yeah. So, like in my mind, the ability, if you look around any city, you see these either swaths of parking or even in downtown, it's just the amount of parking provided there, and that goes across, rural, suburban, urban type development fabrics. The ability to kind of reclaim and infill on a lot of that stuff, I think, is a tremendous benefit that we'll see, and will be interesting to see how that unfolds.
So we might have a big surplus of available land for development then. All these parking lots become land banks. What about with electrification? Do our gas stations become additional land banks? We're going to have to redevelop all those sites?
So yeah, this is another thing we study at CSERT, and especially in the parking lot here, is that sort of intersection between electrification with transportation and the grid, right? So there's the way our grid's laid out now, you can't just arbitrarily put charging stations everywhere. I mean, you have to look at how much power is there, can the system handle it? And then you look at issues about stationary storage, and so there really is an active area of research about how you can design smart grids now that enhance electrification when you deploy transportation. And so I think in addition to our roadway networks and everything else that change, we're going to have to change our grid in terms of how it happens, energy storage and all that. It's one linked system altogether.
Man, I'd love to talk more about that today. That we're opening a whole nother can of worms there. Okay, I have a follow-up question with regard to some of these shifts then. If we take away parking, people are still going to need to be accessing sites. So how does that change site design? How does that change roadway design when people aren't storing their car for the duration of whatever the destination reason is? What do we do differently?
You just have your autonomous vehicle circle the block.
I'm afraid of
Round
that,
and
but
round
that'll
and
be great when I go downtown. I'll say, okay, come back, or we're checking out. Come pick me up.
That's only if you own it. It's not shared, right? So I think everything changes. So it kind of goes back to kind of what Sarah talked about earlier, where that pedestrian trip is going to be that much more important in my mind. You're going to have to manage your curbside space a lot more effectively, where you have more pedestrians accessing the sidewalks and that curbside space, and it's competing with restaurants maybe that are trying to utilize the same space, magazine stands, just that whole dynamic of how that interface occurs. And then on top of it, when you think about the bicycle infrastructure, you know, a lot of times, especially with TNCs, they'll just use the bike lane as a parking for drop-off, and managing that to make sure that everything is happening in a safe way and avoid the collisions and the fatalities that occur in some of those spaces now. I think that's something that's going to change dramatically in how we design space as technology changes.
Well, that's good to hear. We're working on the Google campus up in Mountain View right now, and one of the things that we're recommending is that the outside lane be a flexible lane that is defined on a kind of a block by block basis, because we don't exactly know what's going to happen and how things are going to function in the future, but we're trying to set aside that space for flexibility so that we can adapt without having to tear up curbs and sidewalks and fun stuff like that. I know Jennifer's going to shush me off the mic here in a few minutes, so I got one other question. What does all this mean for transit? I mean, if car use gets a lot easier and cheaper, there's Forbes had an article a while back saying that we might be able to reduce per mile cost by 80% with this new future coming from electric vehicles, the shared model, and autonomous vehicles. So car use might go way up, which has got to affect transit somehow. So what does this mean for transit?
I think on a positive note, one of the big challenges to using transit is the first last mile connection and making it easy to get to your station. And I think there's going to be an explosion of different opportunities, mobility options to get you to the station quicker and easier. So I think that is a great opportunity for transit. I think when we envision kind of the whole change and all in the future transportation, it's going to be much more multimodal. So you're going to pick a certain mode for a certain kind of trip, a certain kind of vehicle, as was mentioned earlier. And I think the opportunities in transit are, it's a very efficient mode to move a lot of people a longer distance. So you may not use it, to take that 5-mile trip. But for the longer stretches, I think transit is still going to play a really important role in moving people efficiently and economically. I think, again, going back to some of the equity issues, it could be really expensive to get the autonomous vehicle to take you your 18 miles to work. So we need to continue to have lots of different options out there for people to use.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. I will also note that the autonomous fleet and even TNCs are affecting some of our non-performing transit routes. We see this in Centennial in Denver. I think it's San Clemente or San Juan Capistrano in Orange County replaced one of their underperforming transit routes where the cost was, I think, $2 to get on the bus for this trip, and an Uber ride is Lyft ride is $11. So basically, the transit agency is subsidizing $9 of that $11 to take Lyft instead of provide service at the frequency they were needing to. So I see it changing kind of the transit use. I still think transit is needed and will be there, but I think there's kind of the ability to merge the two a little bit to facilitate first, last mile, but then also use TNCs as a way to actually reduce some of the mobility costs that some of the transit agencies are currently bearing.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, rather than thinking about is transit going to go away, how can we use the shared mobility and autonomous activity to enhance it, to get people to use it more? I think that's key.
Okay, so we have just a couple minutes before we get into Q&A. Any last takeaways or recommendations to all the folks here who are representing cities? You know, what takeaways should they leave this conference with today? In
I
planning
already
for that
gave
new-
mine, so I'll defer to you guys.
Well, I think, it's important to continue to engage in these conversations because I think change, again, is going to happen very quickly, and we're not used to things changing quickly in the world of transportation planning. The Lyfts and Ubers were introduced not so long ago, and already they're having a tremendous impact. So, for city leaders, I'd say stay engaged, and as you're engaged, make sure to ask the important questions about, don't get distracted by the shiny light. Like, is this really equitable? Is it going to make a healthier community? What's the outcome we're looking for? And are these new options going to help us get there? And then, I guess going back to, I would advise communities to keep investing in things that make your community great and that encourage people to want to be out and exploring your communities. Because again, I go back to, if I have all the access I need from my home, what's gonna make me go to your community to shop? Why am I, gonna spend that extra effort if I have all that accessibility? And so I think the things that are gonna make our communities great are, again, like the simple things of developing those programs to get kids to walk to school. We're gonna continue to need people to walk for health purposes. So anyways, I think those are important things that we can continue to do today to make our communities great and will continue to be important in the future.
All right, we got 30 seconds each.
Okay, very, very quick. And I kind of mentioned this already. I think if we just let the market continue to do more EVs, more shared mobility, autonomous vehicles, that could have a lot of unintended consequences, right? And so I think we do need to start planning and somehow combining that, right? Fleets of automated vehicles that are shared and electric. I mean, FAVES is the way to go.
Yeah, I already mentioned mine. Plan ahead, put the infrastructure in, especially the low-cost stuff, conduit, power. It's going to pay off in the long run.
I think, I guess the thing I would say is plan for flexibility, but I think we're going to see a convergence of two things happening, and kind of speaks to what you all are saying is I think on the one hand, we're going to see a lot of pressure to better accommodate the automobile. I mean, it's inevitable if VMT is going to go up by 20 or 35%, the resultant congestion is going to lead to people banging on city council doors saying, there's a lot of traffic, you have to fix it. On the other hand, the way we design our sites to accommodate the automobile is probably going to go out of date really, really soon. So that's going to be an interesting convergence.
Number of, I think, provocative look at the future and particularly what should be done that's not being done now. Time for questions.
We have one over here.
So I had a question and a comment. My first question is, the one issue you didn't touch on that explicitly is goods movement and freight. It was brought up before. It's a key part of our local economy. It's a key transportation challenging issue. We've talked a lot about autonomous cars, but I think there's potentially some significant issues with goods movement and freight and automation and other technology changes. My second item is really more of a comment. I believe, and I don't just say this because I'm with WRCOG, it's important to address a lot of these issues regionally. Oftentimes, you're not the only you may not be the only, you're not the only city dealing with autonomous vehicles. You're not the only city dealing with TNCs. So I just encourage everyone that as you start to deal with these issues, you talk to your neighbors, you talk to your regional agencies, you talk to SCAG, because if there are guidelines, if there are standards, they're likely to come down from the state, from the region. and rather than reinvent the wheel, you can save a lot of time and effort by talking to your neighbors. But with that, I'm curious to hear your take on freight.
I think, if you look at freight, it's actually more ready for automation than, our standard commute patterns and things like that. So, just last week there was a demonstration of 3 Volvo trucks that are platooning down at the ports. And actually, if you visit the ports, there's actual terminals that are 90% automated. So things are already happening at that level. And mainly because it's kind of a more constrained, controllable environment. So that's where we're seeing a lot more of this automation penetration. And certainly we need to look at that in the Inland Empire with all the warehousing. I mean, it wasn't done in a very systematic way. And I think, kind of organizing that and developing automation for freight in the Inland Empire is a key area to look at.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think they'll be the first early adopters, especially from the collision and safety component. Of trying to remove some of the tired drivers that are currently creating some of that. And I think the insurance industry is going to be pushing it as well. As far as here regionally, part of me thinks in the back of my head, like the 210 corridor has a giant median in the middle of it that's not currently utilized. Part of me thinks looking for those opportunities to promote a corridor like that where maybe you provide a connected vehicle freight type corridor through there could be done pretty cost effectively and be a great test bed to see how it improves goods movement for the region.
Could Sarah ought to comment and call upon the RTP that just got approved. What does it call out?
Well, we do have a big group at SCAG that focuses on goods movement, and we are planning to build out a freight network to get goods moving more efficiently throughout the region. The other thing that we've been studying a lot is, where you place the warehouses, and also how to do the first last mile delivery more efficiently. Since I always tie it back to my bicycle side of things here, we've even seen models where you have a bike lane or a slower speed lane. That's a bike lane during the day, and then the evening you've got some little autonomous bot that delivers goods in that same kind of slow speed lane. So I think, yes, certainly we talk about there's tremendous opportunities for moving people more efficiently, but I think probably the goods is especially going to be.
Are it drones in the future?
I think so. I think it's certainly something that is being explored.
Here you go.
A couple things I didn't see addressed. One is the service industry, where you have dedicated utility vehicles and they have to go point to point. How do you see those interfacing in this new environment? Also didn't hear a mention of disabled services, as you can, sorry, my voice is loud. And you did mention the long haul, so that was one thing I was going to bring up. But I think the spending many hours on the 91, I see a lot of construction vehicles and specific service type vehicles, and those will continue to be single unit. So perhaps comment on that.
So I think I hear two questions then. One is, what about service vehicles, and what about the disabled? So on the one hand, I'd say autonomous vehicles, TNCs as well, probably have, there's probably a lot of opportunity there to improve the equity of our transportation system. There are a lot of people, I think in some cases we found that it's fully a third of a population cannot operate a vehicle because of age or disability. So they're essentially excluded from our primary mode of transportation. Right. So we're probably going to see a lot of people gaining access through not having to be the driver. And that's great. I think with regard to service vehicles, you're right. You're probably not going to see a huge shift. It's just that instead of the construction worker or tradesman having to drive, they might be able to take a nap while they're on the 91 freeway heading home.
And the same thing with electrification, right? So I don't think we'll ever electrify everything, right? There's always going to be some things that still need internal combustion engines and things like that, like service vehicles.
Or my 55 Chevy.
Right. So, but as far as we can take it, I think we need to.
We've got questions up in the front. Is there any questions in the back that?
Hi there. Future of transportation, and I guess within that we include transportation infrastructure, right? And I heard a lot about the autonomous vehicles, but I'm definitely very interested in bicycle transportation because I think that will stay with us, right? It's not going to go away whether we have autonomous vehicles or not. The same thing with pedestrian transportation. So the first question is, how are we managing land use and transportation infrastructure? In a way, I see lots of new developments that have no connectivity to, no bicycle or pedestrian connectivity, with downtowns that are pretty close, actually. So can the state or the SCAG do anything about that? And I had another question somewhere here. Yes, about existing infrastructure. The highways have broken up the old system. And for example, I live between Loma Linda and Colton. And I can go to Redlands. I have 3 options going to Redlands. I can take the I-10, I can take Redlands Boulevard, or Barton. But if I go to Riverside, which is a little bit further away than Redlands, almost the same, my only option pretty much is the highway. So how are we thinking about dealing with such, creating more options in a way where highways disturb existing infrastructure? Thanks.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions there, and what I'm hearing is what about land use, and what does all this mean for alternative transportation, bicycling? And I think we can combine those, like in a response at least. I'll share this with Sarah, perhaps. I think, given the increased convenience of this new autonomous vehicle, shared vehicle mobility future, and the reduced cost, if we're going to want to maintain any of the mode shifts that we've made over the last couple of decades, we're going to have to double down on all of the features that we use, all the tools that we use in order to enhance accessibility by other modes. Okay? If it's easier and cheaper for somebody to get into an Uber car to go 3 blocks, they're going to do it. It's just the way we're wired. So that means we're going to have to make it even easier to get on your bicycle or walk those 3 blocks. We're going to need much more connected areas, much better types of facilities. On the other hand, the autonomous vehicles will likely lead to a safer bicycle and pedestrian environment, so that will help encourage people to take those modes. And I think those same ideas probably carry forward regionally. If it's easier and cheaper to travel by autonomous vehicle, we're going to have a much greater demand for highway capacity space. We might balance some of that by narrowing our lanes or shifting and dedicating certain lanes for certain things. But it means that the long-term trend is we're probably going to see an increase in sprawl all over again. And so we're going to have to be ready again with all. We're going to have to look back into our past, look at those decisions we made about regional transportation investments, and perhaps rethink them in light of trying to keep the equation more balanced for those folks who are not using automobiles. I don't know if you want to.
I can add on some of the resources that we do provide and that are available. I mean, I think, it's a real challenge for local governments that have so many different pressing issues that they're dealing with. I've been working at SCAG for 3 years, and we have seen a whole lot more interest from cities in promoting walking and biking and roadway safety. But it's just, them having the capacity to do so. So we have a lot of cities across our region right now developing active transportation plans and going after. There's more funds available through the federal and state government that they can access to build projects. It's just, all of this takes time when you're building something out. So, and as I said, and then the change can be difficult. Once you get the planning resources and you start building the project, then you have community members coming out and saying, well, I don't want that there. So, these are, changing the built environment is a long and difficult process. But, we are seeing more, there's this acknowledgement because of the health benefits and all these other things that that these are good policy choices, and you are seeing more cities moving forward. It's just going to take a while to see it on the ground.
Could I ask about complete, I thought, at least as a mayor, that complete streets was a kind of transformational policy that had been adopted. Why isn't more conversation about what you can do with the concept of complete streets?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. So from a complete streets perspective, recognize that complete streets were really pushed by bicycle advocacy community. And instead of having streets with no bike lanes, you want your complete street, because let's face it, how many of us want an incomplete street? So that's kind of how it started, right? It's kind of evolved from there to recognize that complete streets are for all ages, all users of all ages and all abilities. In my mind, that doesn't necessarily mean you put a bike lane on every street. But in a lot of cases, it's recognizing that you need to be thinking that people will be biking, they will be there, and how do we design that street to accommodate them appropriately? So all that said, and kind of going back to some of your questions or some of your thoughts, one of the things I think about when I'm planning bicycle infrastructure is I've got an 8 and an 11-year-old daughter and a wife, and in my case, if I wouldn't feel comfortable with them riding on it, and keep in mind my wife used to do 50, 100-mile cycle rides all the time, so she went to Davis as well, so pretty accomplished cyclist. So if she or my kids wouldn't feel comfortable in that facility, odds are you're only going to cater to a very small percentage of that population. So on those streets that you want bicyclists on, make sure you're designing them for the bicyclists. Don't design it for the car and then throw the bicyclists on it as an afterthought from that perspective. I think the other component you brought up was connectivity. And I'll say, I'm a traffic engineer, and my profession's as much to blame for this as anybody. But we used to. Matt's a general plan consultant. General plan, they go through the public process, color diagrams, land use, focus land use, and at the end they'd give it to me as a traffic engineer and say, hey, run your model, tell me number of lanes that we need. And our whole profession focused on what I call that curb to curb. So how many lanes do we put between the curbs? And that's how we planned a lot of our cities. And I think you're seeing that change. Complete Streets is part of why AB 1358. Which is the Complete Streets Act, but I think more so is kind of that integration of land use and transportation, making sure that you're planning both those infrastructures, if you will, concurrently, and that they match each other.
To be fair, that's actually what you and I do.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
Other questions? Take the question that was asked, maybe this is if you have the mayor of a city here, and he asked, glad for your comments, what should I do differently? What should we do differently as a city, anticipating the future that's before us?
I think as a rule of thumb, so we probably all have things to contribute, but I think as a rule of thumb, one thing we should start with is we need to be designing all of our new facilities and maybe guiding all of our new investments, both public and private, with an eye towards future flexibility. So as Jason said, if you're going to build a parking structure that's got a 50-year life, you better be thinking about how you're going to transform that parking structure in 15 years to something else if there's no demand. If you're building a shopping center, you might want to think about how you're going to have 50% too much parking in 20 years and how that that shopping center is set up to transform that parking without completely disrupting that center. I think similarly with roads, you probably are thinking the same thing. Do we have space set aside for flexible lanes in the future? Are we maybe pushing for wider medians to accommodate mixed modes or something, some other thing we're not thinking about? Are we putting fiber in? Are we putting extra conduit in?
I'd say we've been doing that largely. I mean, if you think about our roadway width standards, were much wider 10 years ago than they are today. Even Caltrans has reduced their roadway width standard. So from that perspective, we've almost been adapting and reusing it, and I think a lot of jurisdictions are repurposing the existing public infrastructure to provide more flexibility. A lot of our bicycle infrastructure is being delivered through simple restriping, pretty cost effective, and just repurposing the existing use. And oh, by the way, the byproduct is slower speeds, which improves safety and decreases fatalities when there's a collision. You know, those are all pretty good messages to send and all pretty good things to be looking at now.
Smart cities, right? So, you know, there's this big, you know, rollout of smart cities, and a lot of cities are jumping on this smart city bandwagon. But don't forget that there's 11 pillars to it, right? It's not just transportation, it's the energy, it's the administration, there's a lot of parts to it. And so, yeah, there's all sorts of good examples out there, and I think a lot of cities are doing that.
Matt, if I was interested in the concept of smart cities as something that's coming, where do I look? Where's a framework? Where's a commentary?
So there's good examples. You know, of course, Columbus, Ohio won the Smart City Challenge. Austin, Texas, Long Beach is doing some interesting things. So I think there's a lot of examples out there that are coming up, and Riverside too. I think Riverside's doing their thing. So things are looking good.
Well, if no further comments, that we have an announcement made for lunch. Jennifer, you want to make the announcement?
Yes, lunch has been served. It's in the back hall. If we can get you to line up on the right-hand side of the conference, we're going to take about a 20-minute break. And make sure you stick with us. We have a great panel up next, Future of People. A lot of what we heard today was on millennials and their impact, and so you're going to get to hear from that millennial generation. And then we'll have a wrap-up session with our moderators afterwards, and of course, the raffle. So enjoy your lunch and join us after the break. And please join me in giving a round of applause to our excellent transportation panel.